Hi, welcome to the video session on CPOE-related process review, representation, participation, and consensus. During this session, we'll help you understand the importance of reviewing processes during the implementation of CPOE. We'll make sure it's clear how processes are being identified for review, how the review process works, and make sure you're familiar with how your issues and concerns are being included and represented in the process. And finally, make sure that it's clear how and by whom decisions are being made about key processes that affect you. Putting important electronic medical record functionality in place without looking at processes has been called paving the cow path. The way we do our work before using an electronic record developed and evolved to match the needs of the paper world. When we put an electronic record in without attention to reviewing how our processes will work with this important new tool, we can accidentally reduce the quality, safety, and efficiency of the care we provide. On the other hand, if we attend carefully to the details of the way we accomplish our work and assure that processes and our electronic record functionality match up nicely, we remove friction, we increase the ease of use, and we reinforce high quality, highly efficient, safe patient care. But to get those results, and to make sure that everybody's needs and interests are attended to, we have to be very inclusive, but we also have to work smart to get all the work done in the time available. So how will we go about identifying processes that merit this level of attention and potential redesign? First, we'll look at processes that are currently inefficient, where there's a lot of variation and different ways of doing the same task. Processes that have been historically problematic in the organization, processes where there's a high risk of failure or very important consequences if the process fails, and any processes that will be significantly changed by CPOE. How will we identify processes? They're going to be identified by sure subject matter experts, physicians, nurses, clinicians, and other key stakeholders who we'll describe in a few minutes, the experience of other organizations that tell us where to look for potential trouble, and please note that anyone can raise a process for consideration for review. So if you think of a process that you believe may be seriously affected by CPOE, please bring it up and we'll show you how in a few moments. Some example processes that are typically considered are verbal and telephone orders, transfers between levels of care, DNR orders, and the use of standing and protocol orders. But these are just a few examples of the many processes that will be open for consideration. So to meet the goals of being highly inclusive and extremely efficient at the same time, here are some guiding principles that we're going to use. The first is that all stakeholder groups are represented. All physician groups, specialties, subspecialties, all hospital departments that have an interest that may be affected by CPOE. There won't be any physical meetings. All work will be handled by email, and we'll show you how in just a few moments. Participants represent their entire stakeholder group, not just yourselves. So that means that if you represent the respiratory therapy group, it's not just your perspective, but the perspective of all your colleagues. If you represent the Department of Internal Medicine, you represent all of the members of the department. And as a participant, you're agreeing to get input from the individuals as you and they see appropriate, and to provide feedback to them so that their interests and concerns are being taken into consideration. Now, if an issue does not affect a particular stakeholder group, the representative does not need to vote, and that'll be a little clearer in a few moments. But if you don't choose to vote, you're committing yourself to supporting the group's decision. So if it's an area that doesn't have any impact on you and you don't vote, that's fine. It won't really affect you. But if it is something that affects your group of stakeholders, then you really want to be involved and make sure your voice is heard. Now let's talk about membership in this group. First, all members of the Clinical IT Council are members of the review group. And here's a list of everyone who's a participant in that group. Because of the number of individuals, this group may change from time to time, and we'll adjust the membership and email distribution as needed. Here are additional members from the medical staff and from some of the departments that are not represented at CIT. I'm sure you can see now why this group won't be able to meet as a whole and will do its work by email. So let's talk about the process. And let me reassure you that this is a process that has been used multiple times in other organizations with great success. So first, as we discussed earlier, clinical workflows impacted by CPOE or impacting CPOE will be identified. Process review teams will identify and prioritize the processes involved in those workflows. Then smaller stakeholder review groups will go over the details of the processes and identify what issues and decisions need to be made, and will make recommendations or provide options for the larger group to consider. Then the process review group will frame the recommendations as several options or recommendations in a template, and we'll show you that template in a minute. Templates will always be just one page long and will include all the information you need to place an appropriate vote. Then an individual template for each issue will be sent to the entire group by email for a voting process. This voting process occurs very quickly. You have 48 hours to review the process and return your vote. If there's a clear consensus in the voting, the recommendation will be considered approved, the results will be distributed back to the group, and you'll know what the vote was, and it'll be recommended to the EMR Steering Committee for approval. If there's not a clear consensus, we will work to identify what the issues are. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. And if after all the work the group can't reach consensus, then the 2 or 3 various recommendations that emerged in the discussion will be presented for discussion at the EMR Steering Committee, where final decisions will take place if needed. Now let's talk about the votes. If you have 2 or 3 options, the voting is pretty clear. If you have a single recommendation that comes out of the work groups, then you'll be voting either to approve it or not. You'll have 4 votes available. First, of course, is you can approve it, which is voting in favor of it. The other is reject, which means you're voting against it, but if the majority of the group approves, you can live with the decision and can support the outcome. A third is conference call, and that means that there's some missing information that's so pressing that you can't reasonably cast a vote, in which case we'll arrange a conference call very quickly and clarify the issue. And the final one, and this one's interesting and very effective, is called red flag. Red flag is a no vote, but it's also a no vote that entirely stops the process. So what that means is any one individual can stop the entire voting process. This means that that individual and their stakeholder group cannot support the recommendation if it comes out as currently configured. Now this should not be used for something minor. This is only for very important issues, things that either violate an organizational value or put patient safety at risk or some other major issue. If a red flag occurs, there will be discussion about what the concern is with the individual, and usually these can be clarified. But if the red flag cannot be cleared and the individual continues to throw the red flag vote, then the issue will be presented to the steering committee as a red flag issue. And the person who will present the red flag issue is the person who threw the red flag. Steering committee will evaluate the issue and make a final decision. We anticipate 30 to 45 or more issues potentially going through this process. That's why it's going to be quick. Each vote will take place within 48 hours. And you're very likely to get 2 or 3 issues to vote on at a time. Experience has shown that it will only take 5 to 15 minutes to consider each issue, and you can expect up to 2 rounds of voting each week. So you'll very likely see 2 or 3 issues on Tuesdays with votes due by Thursday, and 2 or 3 issues on Thursday with votes due by the end of the weekend. Steering committee makes the final decisions, and then it's the responsibility of each stakeholder group to make appropriate revisions to their policies and procedures to conform with the decision made by the steering committee. Here's an example of one of the templates that you'll receive for each of the issues under consideration. The first area is Issues and Background, which gives you a succinct description of what the concern is. Then there's a middle section that provides additional information and detail, and this will vary from topic to topic. Next, you have an area that will include either recommendations or options. In the case of recommendations, you're going to pick one of the 4 votes we discussed. In the case of options, you'll select the numbered options. In the bottom left, you'll see a source of the recommendations, and that's the stakeholder group or groups that analyzed the process in detail and made the initial recommendations. And then there's an area called Comments, which will give you any additional topic-specific information that's needed. All these will come to you as email attachments, and we'll cover the mechanics of voting in a separate video. Thank you for your time and attention during this video. In this session, we've gone over the importance of process review during EMR implementation. We've talked about the way processes will be identified for review by this work group. We've talked about the details of how the process will work, and how your issues and concerns are represented in the process, whether you're a participant in the voting process or if you're represented by someone else who is. And finally, we talked about the approach for making important decisions about how key processes related to the EMR will work at SURE.